The Alonzo Kent Mansion, home of Robert H. Jackson Center. Jamestown is proud to be the site of the Robert H. Jackson Center. Here is revered Robert H. Jackson, one of the greatest jurists of all time, who was a justice of the United States Supreme Court and the outstanding chief prosecutor of the Nazi war criminals in Germany following the Second World War. The site chosen for this important center at the intersection of 4th Street and Prendergast Avenue was the Jamestown Scottish Rite Masonic Temple, which was originally the home of the very prosperous early Jamestown citizen named Alonzo Kent. He came to Jamestown in 1832 at the age of 22 years with a mere 50 cents in his pocket. Mr. Kent set up a writing school, a dry goods business, and later became president of a Jamestown bank, which he and 4 friends organized in 1853. The bank was located in his dry goods store and was reorganized in 1864 to become the first national bank of Jamestown. Alonzo Kent's energy led him to also buy a farm in the town of Bustye and build the Kent House Hotel in Lakewood, one of the largest on Lake Chautauqua. Being very interested in horses, he erected a large brick building behind the mansion in Jamestown to house them. This part of his total property was later altered by the Scottish Rite and made into the present auditorium and stage for the Masonic degrees. The Kent Mansion was the first brick home built in Jamestown. It was built in 1858. No expense was spared when this Italianate mansion was constructed. The finest woods were used in chambers designed by noted architects. The original entrance of the Kent home faced 4th Street, and it was under a large porch whose roof was sustained by handsome Ionic pillars. The windows are semicircular, arched with elaborate cast iron caps and cast iron sills. In later years, an entrance was made on the Prendergast Avenue side of the home, where a circular driveway was created for cars to drop off their passengers, the cloakroom being just inside. It's hard to realize that the cloakroom was originally occupied by the Kents as the kitchen and pantry, whose door would open onto the dining room. The dining room is now the boardroom of the center and is somberly elegant. It is centered with a modern table and chairs, above which hangs a brilliant multi-branched brass chandelier with matching sconces around the room. Its walls are covered with glossy panels of oak, and its windows, recently restored, are made of many small glass panes held together by elegant strips of lead. A large china cabinet, almost as wide as the room, faces the fireplace. Its embossed and molded glass doors add to its elegance. It was in the dining room that weekend guests of the Alba Kents were entertained to menus, it is said, up to 17 courses. These noted guests were such as Mrs. Frederick Watrous, a member of New York's 400, and actresses Lillian Russell, Ethel Barrymore, to name a few. However, the most famous of all visitors to the mansion was the President of the United States, Ulysses S. Grant, who stopped on his way to the Chautauqua Institution on August 14, 1875, where he had been invited to give a speech. It is here that the president once sat with his retinue to partake of a, quotes, collation consisting of 12 courses, close quotes, which were enjoyed by Governor Reuben Fenton, Governor Washburn, the Honorable Walter L. Sessions, Judge Marvin, the oldest member of the lower house of Congress, and General Babcock. Orsino Jorn is credited with the way in which the streets of Jamestown were decorated for the arrival of President Grant, who for most people was not only president, but also a great general and war hero worshipped by the populace. Jamestown streets were arched with evergreens, and from all the buildings hung flags and bunting, and across Main Street was a banner inscribed with the words, "Welcome to President U.S. Grant." When the president left the Kent mansion, by the way he was wearing a pale gray coat, Mr. Kent took him in his private carriage drawn by two large black horses, which the president remarked were, quotes, "fine looking, but too fat for speed," end quotes. Crowds of people and carriages followed the president and wished him Godspeed as he boarded the yacht Josie Bell at the Jamestown boat landing and sailed off to Chautauqua, flanked by as many boats as would fit into the outlet. At the southeast corner of the mansion is a delightful and almost cozy little solarium completely enclosed in leaded glass panes. Can you imagine the pots of multicolored flowers, the climbing vines, the hanging baskets of blossoms, as Mrs. Alonzo Kent, in a long silk dress, inspected her kingdom of flowers? When Mrs. Kent died in 1866, the entire Kent mansion was full of flowers. Her husband survived her by only 2 years. In 1888, the Italianate villa was bought by Alonzo Kent's nephew, Alba Kent, and his wife, Mrs. Rose Eleanor Wetmore Kent. They lived in the house for 24 years. Through Mrs. Kent's substantial financial resources, many agreeable additions and improvements were made to the house. A third story was added to the building at the rear, and the beautiful oak and mahogany paneling throughout the home was inspired by Mrs. Kent's son, Charles D. Wetmore, who was a renowned architect of New York City, having built the Biltmore Hotel and the Grand Central Station. Mrs. Alba Kent is remembered as a gracious person who entertained beautifully and who loved flowers. She had rose gardens around her house and even between her home and the stables. The stables later were converted to be the present auditorium. Cut flowers were in all the rooms of the house, and the solarium acted as a small greenhouse. Mrs. Kent was so deeply interested in Christian Science that she built for that denomination its second church in New York State. It still stands at the southwesterly corner of 4th Street and Prendergast Avenue, across from the Jackson Center. Her funeral was one of the largest and most impressive ever held in Jamestown. Many who attended came in private railroad coaches. The casket was located in the corner of the mansion hall, directly under the staircase, which was completely banked with orchids, and the hall was filled with flowers banked to the ceiling. Many of the exotic flowers came from New York, friends of Charles Wetmore, Mrs. Kent's son, who, because of his prominence as an architect in New York City, was able to penetrate the New York theatrical and artistic scene and also marry Mrs. Frederick Watrous, one of the wealthiest women in New York society. Charles Wetmore and his bride lived at the mansion for 2 years and then moved to their beautiful house at Long Point on Chautauqua Lake. It was there that Mrs. Wetmore's daughter was married to Sir Henry Thornton, president of the Canadian National Railways. It is noted that 18 presidents of railroads of this country and Canada were present at the wedding, and there were 18 private cars on the sidings along the J&W and N&W Railway between Bemis Point and Mayville. Adjoining the dining room is the director's office, a pleasant room with lovely leaded windows and panelled with glossy cherry wood. A frieze of exquisite fluidity is carved in this same cherry wood above the fireplace, which is lined with a 2x2-inch ceramic tiles in depths blue. The room has many built-in shelves which lead one to believe it might have been a small library. An almost square large room is directly at the east of the original entrance to the house. Its elegant fireplace of white marble is adorned at its center arch with a large cluster of fruit. 2 large windows face what was once a rose garden. From the center of the highly decorated ceiling hangs an ornate chandelier, and above the mantel is a large square mirror with a black and gold chinoiserie frame recently incorporated into the room. It probably served as a reception room leading to the ornate French salon, which occupies the west corner on 4th Street and extends along Prendergast Avenue, where great windows faced gardens full of flowers. This room on the west side is often referred to as the Gold Room. It has a white marble fireplace similar to the one just described, and an elegant chandelier of cut glass and gilded metal. Above the fireplace is a mirror which reflects the other side of the room. The furnishings of the room are at present completely inadequate. The decorating committee has plans to restore the room to its original Louis XV style. The furniture's gilded paint is to be replaced by its original wood and gold leaf, and the upholstery by some elegant French satin in the Louis XV style. The present wall cloth will be removed and substituted with more correct material. Because the second floor of the mansion is not readily accessible, no description of the upstairs floors are given here. However, we take you to the addition which was created when the Scottish Rite Masonic bodies bought the mansion in 1917. In spite of its size, the Masons greatly needed an auditorium and stage in which to exemplify their degrees. This problem was ingeniously solved with much work and expense by the conversion of Alonzo Kent's stables, which were previously not connected with the mansion on 4th Street. Alonzo Kent was a great lover of horses and owned many fine ones, as well as coaches and carriages of different types. To house them, he built a large brick building to the north of the mansion. The Masons moved the roof of this building and extended it upwards 12 feet to create a small auditorium of 240 seats, which looks down from a slant onto a well-designed theatrical stage behind velvet curtains for degree work. Below this auditorium, the Masons created a spacious dining room running the entire width of the building and a nicely equipped kitchen and storage area. This placed the dining area comfortably accessible to the Masons after their degrees by means of stairways on both sides leading up to the hall between the auditorium and the mansion. At one section of the hall connecting the auditorium and the mansion is a nice area where there are exhibited a quantity of very interesting and varied photos of Justice Jackson. Opposite those is a case of Jackson memorabilia and a case in which there is a figure wearing the elegant black suit which Mr. Jackson wore at official functions. In 1917, the Scottish Rite Masonic bodies acquired the Kent property. Then, in 2001, title to the property passed to its present owner, the Robert H. Jackson Center. I have given here a brief history of the Kent mansion and the Alonso Kent family and the Alba Kent family in order to help one visualize the kind of rich and important people who lived here. It's hard to comprehend the fact that a President of the United States, Ulysses S. Grant, and his retinue ever visited Jamestown, that he strolled these rooms as we do, that he looked into the very mirrors of the parlor that we now see. Without a history of its owners and inhabitants, a house is just a house. How wonderfully appropriate it is that after the learned Masonic group who occupied the Kent mansion, it should now be owned and under the guidance of an association intent on preserving and promoting the legacy of one of the world's greatest jurists, Robert H. Jackson.
Terrific.
Shall I do it again?
Terrific.